Hi, this is Marina from frocksandfrolics.com, and I've got another little pattern for you that we're going to sew up together. This is our country apron, and I have done a whole spanking new video for you. For the pattern and the complete sewing course for this apron, you just have to go into the link in the video description and you will find all the details there. So let's get started. It's very simple, so if you are a beginner, you're going to love the little ties and the waistband. The first thing to do is to print off your pattern. Make sure it's set on actual size or 100% on your printer. Measure the test scale, should be 5 centimeters or an inch, and then we are ready to go. So the first thing is to cut everything out, and we've put that together. And if you're not sure how to do it, you can always see on the assembly plan what goes together. The assembly plan is different for the different sizes, of course. And I've got my fabric here that I'm going to use. I've actually got a really lovely, very sturdy, firm check fabric for that. It's just the rest I had. And for my ties and the lining, I've got a lovely soft printed cotton. And then I've got this ribbon, which is like the Edelweiss ribbon, which is really nice. It gives it that kind of Swiss feel. And I'm going to use bias binding to bind the edges. You don't have to bind the edges, but I think it's like really nice. And this is a particularly lovely bias binding that I've bought in the UK. So I'm a bit upset that in America I haven't been able to buy anything like that. So now we're going to place the front on the fold and make sure that the fold is really nice and straight. And one pin in every corner is what I would suggest. And when you are a really good seamstress or seamstresser, you can just use weights. That's also good. Now here's a tip for cutting out. Especially beginners, always use your left hand to hold your fabric and kind of fold it back, and your right hand is the one that holds the scissors. If you're left-handed, it's exactly the other way around. Now I'm going to cut my lining, and because I need it to be on the fold, I have to turn over my pattern piece. Now I'm cutting again from the left, as you can see here. It's totally simple. Right, this is what it's going to look like. Now we need to do the pocket. And the pocket I'm also cutting in this beautiful fabric. Oh, this arrow needs to lie along the selvage so that you make sure that everything is cut out straight. Because whether it goes down or across, that is the strongest part of your fabric. So now I can put my pocket on here, and we could sew it on with a centimeter seam allowance, snip it, and then turn it under, right? But what we are going to do is we're going to bias bind it, and so I'm just going to put it under like that, and that's it. Then the next step, I'll explain it as we get to it. Now I need to cut out my ties, and I need 2 of those. There we go. Last but not least, we're going to cut the waistband now, and that's the decision. Do you want it in your apron fabric, or do you want it in the contrast, like mine here? There we go. And personally, I thought I wanted to show you how it's done with a check, because a check is very helpful. But it's also that you have to keep some stuff in mind. And we're going to have a look now at what exactly that is. Lining up any of those checks would be really hard. So you always want to go the opposite direction with your waistband that you went with your actual apron, right? So that you've got that line going across. It's much, much nicer. And of course, it's easier as well. So I'm going to fold this over, find somewhere where I've still got enough fabric to do that. I'm turning it over so I don't waste any. There we go. Anyway, we've cut everything out, and we are now ready to sew it together. How do I know where the ribbon has to go? First of all, fold it in half, because then we know exactly what height the front has. And then the other thing is that we've of course got the 1 centimeter seam allowance. So you can take a ruler, or you can like a tape measure and just measure it out and see where the line gets to. and then from that line I need to find the center, and that's where I'm going to put my ribbon. So with checks it's really easy because you can see it would run very nicely along that blue line. So all I have to do really is take one pin and pin that to exactly that place. So I'm just shimmying it along. Don't lose my line. And I put a pin on, and then I can top stitch it to my waistband on either side. It's really very, very simple. I can cut it off. I'm using a Gutermann thread actually. I really think the world of Gutermann. I think it's a really good thread, and if you do a lot of top stitching it's worthwhile getting one of those. You don't have to use it for all the seams, but when you do top stitching a really nice thread is a good thing. The older I get actually the more I use just nice, good, reasonable thread. You can always tell a good thread, so when you hold it into the light and you don't have fibers sticking out, then you know it's a really good thread because it's been twisted very tightly. And if you want to know more about that, you can watch the little sewing course on fibers and yarns and how fabrics are made, so you understand a bit better the difference between the threads. Now I've gone down either side here, and I try to do it as close to the edge as possible, but not so that I can slip off. And don't use contrast if you can't keep it straight, but if you can, of course, that's absolutely okay. So you could have used beige, or I used red. Now let's look how we're going to do a perfectly bound western pocket. Just a little word here again, I think I've said that before, but you could work this like that. So you're putting the pocket onto your apron, right sides facing each other, sew it with a 1 centimeter seam allowance, snip, turn, iron, and bob's your uncle, you would be done, right? But we want this beautiful effect, and if you have a really nice bias binding like I do here, then obviously that is a really, really nice thing to do. And I just hope America follows suit and you get like nice bias like you do in the UK. They are really the kings and queens of bias binding. I shall get lots this Christmas when I go home. So now I'm going to just pin this along, because in order for this to like be properly bound and not slip out, especially when you're just starting to sew, you should sew this together. What this also does is you're going to give it some stability by sewing it down. So we're going to do this, and what you see here is that I push my fabric into the presser foot. This is really important because you don't want to stretch it. So basically that's like putting a stay stitch in, yeah, but you don't need to pull anything. It's already going to hold this now. Next, I'm going to take my bias binding. Usually it has got one side which is slimmer than the other, and the wider side always has to lie underneath it so that it will always catch it. But here they're actually exactly the same. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to put this on here, but don't start on the edge. I pin this in here on the edge, but you want to leave a little bit hanging over the top. That's way easier, and you see it in a minute, because when I take it on the sewing machine, magically it's something different, because I made 2 of these and then ran out of the pretty stuff, so I had to use something else. Anyway, this is why you want to leave 2 centimeters standing at the top, because it will get stuck if you don't do that. And then I'm going to push in right into the fold my fabric of the apron. The key is to feed it in all straight. You can't do this fast. I do it really slowly, and then sew as close as you can to the edge. And I always say don't watch your needle, but you do have to keep an eye on the needle. I watch it just for the bias binding, where you're really close to the edge. And here you can see that the lower part of my bias binding is actually a bit wider. Yeah, and this is the stuff that I've used, my bias tape. which is called double fold. This is from Joann's and it's quite slim. I would recommend that if you have never done this before, take the wider one. And now that we've done that, we can just put this on top of each other and pin in the pocket. It's very, very simple. I was actually really pleased with myself when I came up with this technique. Some years ago I thought, this alleviates having to even make the pocket properly. Although, of course, you can, and how that's done, if you want a separate pocket, I actually show you in our special winter one, which you can also find in the Academy. There we go, just a pin on this side, just make sure it's nice and flat. Once that's pinned in, it's not going to go anywhere. Brilliant. Super. And now all I have to do is sew it on. It's so simple and so quick. So if you make these for a bazaar or to raise money or for your shop, literally you can make one of those in about 15 minutes. It's that quick. And especially if you know what you're doing, you probably can cut down lower than that. You know, if you made 5 or 6 at the same time, you probably get down to between 10 and 15 minutes per apron. Now, there's no seam allowance for that really. It's always 1 centimeter, but if you're a bit, you know, further off or if you're closer to the edge, it doesn't really matter because it's just a pocket. There you go. Do the same on both sides. That's what it looks like. Just turn it again. Whoop. And there's your pocket. So that's really nice, right? Now, so again, same as on the pocket, we have to sew this down all the way around, otherwise it's so easy to slip out. So I'm going to put my pins in vertical to the seam. And when it's vertical to the seam, that means I don't have to take the pins out. I can just zoom round it close to the edge. This is not a centimeter seam allowance. I'm going really close just so I catch it. And that will be that for this step. And then we're going to go and bind that, of course, in our next step. And also, if you're using the check, watch out that your line you're stitching now is actually even Steven on that check or that line going across, because we're going to cut it back as a next step and we want it to be all looking even. Now need to bind it, just a few steps. And here you can see how lovely it will look if you just keep to a few of the rules of bias binding. And we've already sewn around it so it can't go anywhere. So your next step now is to cut it back. And I would do it quite smartish, especially if you're working with checks and stuff and you've actually done it so you were sewing on the line. So if you cut like 2 millimeters off that, you absolutely know that your binding will sit perfectly. So take your binding, again, if you are a beginner, please do use a wider binding. The binding will go on the edge here, and the wider part of the binding obviously needs to sit underneath, and the slimmer part will sit on the top. So you take that now and you just place it at the top of your apron. And then you just put it on, but you make sure that you put it on so that there is an overhang, so that we have something that we can pull so it doesn't get stuck at the very beginning, because it likes to do that and that's none too pleasant. So there we go, all the way around. Hop over to the sewing machine and get yourself ready. I can cut it off as well. Don't need to, but you can. And now I'm going to put it under here, and as you can see, right, I leave a little bit hanging at the top. It's so important. You want to be able to have something that you can pull on. And then we're just going to put the apron in right into that fold, but don't push it too much, because that will then get the top part of your binding to push out, and I think if you've already done that before, you'll know that that's really easy. So it just goes into the fold, but don't overdo that. And then you just hold it steady and you feed in your bias binding always straight. When you come to the curve, you need to grab your apron with the left hand and you literally pull it round while the binding is fed in straight. But you can see that I'm holding it over a tiny bit to the left, because as I go round, I need the needle to catch it, otherwise it wouldn't catch it, right? So if you watch very closely, you can see me do that. It's ever so slightly to the left and then over. Normally I say don't look at the needle, but here you really need to do that. You need to practice this and always make sure that the edge of that binding is right on the edge of the left side of that presser foot. I use a puff machine. I've got a clear presser foot here, so it's very easy to see. This will take practice, but as long as you keep to the rules, and that is to feed in your bias binding straight when you go around the curve with a tilt to the left, but only like a millimeter or so, and then it becomes straight as it goes right up to the needle. And then it's really easy to do the long stretch. Phew! I do like that when it's all straight. And then we have to do the same thing again on the other side. Again, don't pull your bias binding. You pull the apron. There you go. See, now you can see how I just shimmy it around, so when it goes in it's straight, but I put it in and it's not straight, and then I move it over with my fingers. And that will take practice, obviously. You know, it's not something that you can do straight away. I would say if you're a beginner, please don't use the slim binding. Get yourself a wider binding for it. And of course, if you don't want to bind it at all, you could go over to the Christmas apron, which is also in the Academy, and see how you do it when you don't bias bind it. All you need is an extra facing, and I'll show you how to do that as well. Here you can see that on board bias binding, often it's not as perfect as what you would make at home, so it was a bit wider, but it worked okay. It looks really nice. When I turn it over in the places that the bias binding was wider, the under one, it is not quite as nice, but then again, nobody sees that anyway. We're going to put the waistband and the ties together. So I've got my waistband with my ribbon, and I'm taking the ties, and on either side I'm just going to attach them with a 1 centimeter seam allowance. So I'm putting a few pins in, so I'll be like that, and then I take the other tie and I put that right sides facing on the end on this side. And again, I put a few pins in. All I have to do now is to sew it down with a 1 centimeter seam allowance. Over to the sewing machine. Don't forget to lock in your stitches at the beginning and at the end. Next step is to press it to either side. Right, you can just do that with the fingers if you like, and then we're going to top stitch on either side. Make sure that your stitch length for top stitching is always a little bit longer, so 3 or 3.5. Keep a good distance to the seam line, and that's it. Now we just turn down the waistband and we're sewing it to the top of the apron with the right sides facing, and you can see that the edge here lies inside your bias binding. Now, if you work the apron a little bit different, I'm showing you that in the Christmas one, then it will lie exactly on top of each other, but when you bind it, it doesn't quite. So make sure you don't try to hold stuff in there, okay? Just go to the inside of the bias binding. And I'm just going to pin this on, and then we're going to sew this with a 1 centimeter seam allowance. And of course, if you have a stripe or if you have a check, you'll have a really good line that you can keep to. So if you've not been sewing very much before, that's really great, and it'll look absolutely fab. As you can see here, it'll be dead straight. Lock in your stitches, choose which one it is. Even if it's not quite a centimetre, it doesn't matter as long as it's even, right? And I'm choosing that blue line because I think, well, that's the easiest to go by. And I make that line up exactly with the center of my presser foot. And I just pull it a little bit as well as I go along. Brilliant. All the way to the other side. Bang on that edge. First of all, you want to iron this real quick so that it sits nicely and you can check that you've done it really well. Because if you haven't, this is the time that you could still do something about it. Oh, wow, I really love it. Turn it over, and then this feels really thick. So I'm taking my scissor and I'm cutting back one of the seams just so it's not that thick. Also cut back the really thick parts here, and then it'll be really nice and flat. Now we're gonna just see how that is gonna look. That's just gonna be turned in here. But before we do that, we want to close the ties. So we just put them on top of each other. You want to reduce the stitch length to like 1.5 or something for the tip, and then you can lengthen it again. And we're sewing all the way to the waistband. You can sew a little bit further. It's a technique actually that people that sew or have sewn for a longer time, they use that as well when they're putting on skirts, this kind of like rolling it up a little bit and then just hiding it in and pulling it sideways and going as far as they possibly can, sewing everything together and having like an almighty sausage in there. But when you start sewing, I would say just sew to right where the waistband starts, because it's really easy to get this wrong and to pull it a bit and then it won't look nice. And because we are top stitching this anyway, it's all going to be caught, so you don't have to do any hand stitching anyway. So just you know, go for as far as you can go, but just to the beginning is absolutely fine, or even stop slightly in front of it, it doesn't matter. Right, over to the sewing machine, stitch length down to just 1 or 1.2. Go backwards and forwards a few times and then lengthen your stitch length again. And I'm going foot width because that's what it was when I did the waistband. Yeah, I want to really hit the same point when I get to the waistband. That's the only important thing here. So I line it up with the edge of my presser foot in my case, but it really depends where that check was and where you wanted that line to be. And I just went for slightly less than a centimetre because it looks better. There we go. Just let it glide into the same line that you have, you know, where you sewed the waistband on. You can kind of see it, and I'm just going to go a little bit over here, not too much. It's not necessary, right? You could even stop a little bit further to the left. And then I just pull the apron out. That's it. Now I need to cut back my ties because otherwise turning it will be really difficult. So I'm going to cut some off here. You can cut away even more sharpish than I did here, but mine is so soft, this fabric, I was a bit worried it might fray. Then get yourself a pencil or a stick of some sort, you know, and then we're going to put that one in and we pull the fabric over it until it gets to the other side. That's what I always tend to use because I've always got a pencil there. I do a lot of pencil drafting. When I do my first patterns, I draw them out with pencil first, and so I've got like umpteen pencils, they're everywhere. I'm like IKEA, you know, the little pencils from IKEA where they have them everywhere. That's me. Right, so I'm coming to the side, and then I can grab it and pull it through, and then you've turned your tie inside out. I have seen all manner of ways of doing this, where people were sitting there half an hour because they thought I was too busy and they didn't want to ask me a question, and they've tried to pull it through from the end of where the apron is, and that of course takes forever. This is really fast, so if you've never turned something through, that's the way to do it. Now I'm shaking out my little pencil. Oh, there you are. Hello, my friend. So now we're going to move out the edges of our seam, and we're rolling them out so they're right in the edge where we're going to iron. And when you're pulling out the corners, don't ever go in straight from the top. Go sideways a little bit and then pull stuff out. It makes all the difference, because when you have all that pressure on, sometimes you just, a right hand will just go woof and it's frayed, you know, and I've got all the fibers hanging out, which is not what we want really. So if you come in a little bit sideways, it's way easier. I've done a better job on this side than on the other side, so we're going to continue on that, and I'm going to do one side slightly worse, not quite, you know, doing it right, and see what the difference is. Also, you can see me here do something what my students always said, that's so disgusting. I always like to lick my fingers a little bit, because when you have a bit of saliva on it, it might be disgusting, but it's way easier to roll the edge out. And final step is to give it all a good press. Now I'm moving on to pressing the waistband as well, and I really turn that in here. And I was a bit frightened that I might not have enough, so I thought, oh, I'll let it hang over the, you know, the stitching line a little bit. And I ironed it from the outside, and then I started pinning on the inside. But it looked perfect, doesn't it? It's really, really lovely. So then I started pinning, and as I was pinning, I thought, oh, this doesn't look very nice. Sometimes you want to be overly careful, and it's actually not very good. And I just looked at it and I thought, no, I really don't like it. You know, so trust yourself. Just do it so the lines look good, right? Look, perfect. There we are, all done. Now we can start top stitching it. You want to start anywhere in the middle. You never want to start at the very end or on the waistband. Somewhere in the middle. Find a fixed point. In my case, on my puff machine, I've got these little red lines on my presser foot that I'm always using to guide through. And then my left hand just, again, it just holds the fabric, and the right hand just pushes it through. So you won't have as good a control over your left hand when you first start. And then after a while, the left hand gets like really nimble as well, and your motor skills improve on your left hand way more than they normally would. And so I'm using my fingers like a guide to go through, and they're automatically in the right place to line it up. You can see I've put a double thread in the corner so that I have something to pull on, because otherwise the fabric is just going to be sucked into the machine and just hammer on that same spot, which is really bad. So you pull it. What I haven't done here, and I'm having loops on it, is I haven't done my tension. When you get to the edge, it's better to put the tension up to 7 or even 8, because that way you won't get a loop, and then you put the tension back down. So on the other side, I'm going to do it correctly, and then you're going to see the difference between the she was almost there and how it should look. Yeah, so when you get to the waistband, again, you want to have a bit of pressure on it and pull it so that you don't get stuck, especially if you have a sewing machine that's not so good. And here you can see how I just do that with my left hand. It's like, it's not always that the slower you go, the better it is. I find that if I sew slower, actually it's going to end up more crooked. So now I'm going to put a double thread again right through the tip here. Come on. Oh, doesn't want to go through. Had a bit stuck in there. Right, like that, so I can hold on to it. And now I'm going to put the tension up to 8 as well. There we go. And move it around and I can pull it. Wow, and that gives you a perfect result. Back down with the tension. Look, absolutely no loops, so that's perfect. This is how you should be doing it. And we go to the same point where we started. Job done. Well done. If you got to this point, you have made a beautiful apron. I hope you learned something. Here you can see on the left hand side how it's really done well, and this has got like loops, right? So the tension is vital. Put the tension up and it'll come out absolutely perfect. And that was it already. Don't forget, we have got plenty more in the course for you, even a Christmas apron which is super cute, so check out the details below and get sewing. See you soon. Bye for now.